The Oregon Education Investment Board will come to order. Seth, would you call it?
Governor Kitzhopper.
Here.
Julia Brim Edwards. Yvonne Curtis. Matthew Donegan. Samuel Henry.
Here.
Nicole June Maher.
Here.
Mark Mulvihill.
Here.
David Reeves.
Here.
Ron Saxton.
Here.
Mary Spildy.
Here.
Kay Turan.
Here.
Hannah Vendering.
Here.
Dick Withnow.
Here. Very good. We have quorum. So first of all, I just want to congratulate Nancy Golden for assuming the role of our permanent Chief Education Officer. And I want to thank the Management Personnel Oversight Subcommittee for really facilitating this, and really want to thank Julia for making this happen, spending a lot of time even working through a trip to Asia, right, to make it happen. And I appreciate all of you adjusting your schedule so that we could have the board be able to confirm Nancy. I also want to congratulate Ben Cannon, who is leading us. He has been appointed the Executive Director of the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission. He is the appointment is immediate, so he is here gratis, out of the goodness of his heart, to help us out, and he has agreed to help us continue to support our work here until we get a replacement for him. So congratulations to you, Ben. So the good news is, I think at this point we have all the appropriate personnel in place and our policies and structures in place, so now it's time to implement. I'll turn this over to Nancy in just a minute. If we could get a motion, though, to approve the minutes from the September meeting.
So moved.
Seconded to approve the minutes of the September meeting. Is there discussion or objection? If not, so ordered. Very good. Let's start with a report from our Chief Education Officer.
Thank you. I want to begin by just saying, did you notice you got one agenda this time, right? And in addition, what we've done is we've just changed, because people are getting confused with notebooks. So your agenda, this is the book that has your strategic plan and all the other information. In the beginning is your packet. So there's a green page that divides it. So in the end, if you want to take your packet home, just take it out to the green page, but don't take the rest, because that's all our strategic, those are the documents we want with you every time in case you need to refer to them. So just a little bit new system. I want to begin by just letting everyone know how thrilled I am to be the Chief Education Officer. And I want you to know I will work tirelessly to do everything I can on behalf of the wonderful students we have in Oregon, and I consider this an absolute higher ethical position, and I will bring every sense of moral responsibility to what I do, because this is a sacred trust, and I appreciate your faith in me. So thank you very much. If you look in the packet behind number 2, there's some information, and I'd like you to turn. It's my September update of key things I've achieved, but if you were to look at the organizational chart that looks like this, and Hannah, I remember you said when you get people hired, are you going to share who they are with us and what they do? So the second page actually gives you a description of what they do, but I'm going to take a minute to introduce the staff to you, because I think we're here to serve you as a board and the children in Oregon. I want to make sure you know who all of us are. So I'm actually going to start with Whitney, who's been here for quite a while, but she now has a new role, which is Chief of Staff. And Whitney worked with me in 2011 when I was in Ben's position. But before that, she was a trial lawyer, and we're happy you didn't like being a trial lawyer, because we actually get those great talents that you brought to put to use with everything you've done up till now, and also in the role of Chief of Staff. Next, and if the people I introduce next, if you just raise your hand so people know who you are. Next is Doran McEwen, and you want to raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Doris has been here, actually, this is her second year. And she comes with a really strong background. She's worked at Pearson, and she was vice president and general manager. She was a superintendent in the state of Washington, and we often look to Washington for certain innovation. So she brings great knowledge there. She's been on the faculty, the director of school administration in Indiana at Indiana University. We're thrilled to have her, and Doris's key responsibility is to help us make sure we take the equity lens and really get it implemented. She's working in family engagement and community partnerships, so that's Doris. And then David Edwards, where's David, is here, and some of you might recognize David as a previous legislator, so he's certainly got experience in that arena, and he was a director of research and policy. And for us, what he is going to do is develop the P20 research agenda and make sure as we look at the key targets on our achievement compacts, we really get clear about what can leverage the targets the most. So we're really thrilled to have you here, David, and really appreciate you. Hilda Roselli, who was also here last year. I think we all knew Hilda as a wonderful dean at the College of Ed at Western, and that was not her first university. She was at University of Southern Florida, where she was an associate dean, but she's also been a preschool educator and a middle school teacher. And one thing she did, which I think is so terrific, she with her students put a time capsule, you know how you bury a time capsule, and 30 years later she came back together with her students and they undug that time capsule. So that I know is a thrilling experience for you. And Hilda works in...
Stamps were 18 cents.
What'd you say?
Postage stamps were 18 cents.
Okay, see, things happen in 30 years. So Hilda will be working with mainly our post-secondary areas, and we're just thrilled to have her here. And then I introduced last time, but I'd like you to just raise your hand again. Mark Lewis, who is working in the STEM area. Peter Trumba, who's going to be providing our P20 database, and then Kristen, who is our community relations person. So that's the team. In addition to that, we have 3 key support people, and Cassandra, who is here, she is the person who's the associate assistant to the chief education officer, and I'm so thrilled to be working with Cassandra. Did you raise your hand so everyone can see you? She's about the warmest person you'll ever meet, and she came to us from the Legislative Commission of Indian Services, and she's had over 15 years in state government, so she brings a lot of skills with her. So if you go back to the organizational chart, you'll see that that's our team, and we're just thrilled to be here and really get started together. I did want to talk about a few other things. I wanted to just share my strategy to visit, because I'm out and about a lot, and I'm doing strategic visits, because I think my job is to really look at what's really working out there and how can we look at those models and just make people aware of them or scale them up, whatever's appropriate. So one visit that I did recently was to see Playworks. Playworks is a program that actually has skilled people work to make sure that recesses are really where kids are actively involved in physical activities. But equally important is that kids feel like there's a community out at recess, because what we know is if kids are isolated or teased or bullied at recess, it turns into huge behavior problems which start a spiral downward in terms of achievement. So that was quite exciting to see. I also went to Forest Grove High School and Middle School, where they have extraordinary achievement, and I've seen the use of technology to transform learning in a way that is really amazing. I really hope we can start talking about technology and how that can really move the dial for our students. After that, I went to Intel to talk to them about partnerships with us around technology. They're doing that in Forest Grove, and they're a great partner. So I do my Eastern Oregon tour starting on Sunday. One thing that's become really clear to me is that urban areas are different than rural areas, and when we come up with strategies that we think work the same across the state, we've really got to change that. So that's something else that I've been doing. And then the last thing, everything we do from an equity lens, and we've been working really hard on that in our office, from even making sure we're not saying bills and names without talking what they're about, or using acronyms, to making sure anytime we're presenting about the values. And there's two values that, I talk about all the values, but the two values that I'm getting such a tremendous response to is that having a second language is an asset, and that the various cultures that are now coming together in Oregon is what makes us a great state. So, it's our job to be accountable around the equity lens. And then the last thing I just want to make sure you all know about, we're very excited about the Achievement Collaborative meeting that's happening on Thursday at the Convention Center, and we think that the collaboratives are really where we're going to be able to take this idea of achievement compacts and get them to work in our community. So I hope as many of you as can will be there. And it's really going to be a day of celebration, and I know you're going to be with us, right? So that's my report.
Any questions for Nancy, Nicole?
I just have a comment. I had the honor of being at Play Works with Dr. Golden, and I think it's important for this board to know that we have hired someone who can play a mean Foursquare. And it was so neat to be there with her, both when she found out about the job and also to see her immediately turn around and spend 2 solid hours just playing, spending time with a bunch of K through 5th graders. So it was great.
It's so amazing with little children. I was running with some, I think, 1st or 2nd graders, and at the end of about 15 minutes of running around with them, they said, "Let's do it again tomorrow." Well, I'm a guest, so I don't get to do it with you tomorrow, so.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next on the agenda, we've got our First Lady, Sylvia Hayes, who will come forward to talk a little bit about the Prosperity Initiative. I just want to tee this up a little bit. Sylvia probably won't tell us this, but she comes from a background of deep poverty, and is a first in her family to get a college degree, and understands the importance of education, and noticed a lot of the things that we've been doing over the last 3.5 years around early childhood learning and our P through 20 efforts, healthcare efforts, and thought that we really needed to move this together in a much more comprehensive approach to poverty reduction / prosperity. And so I want to give her an opportunity to share with us what she's been up to for the last 1.5 years. Some of the people on board.
Well, thank you.
Identify yourself for the record.
Sylvia Hayes. Thank you, Governor, and board members. Appreciate the chance to be here. And that is exactly the story. When I wound up in the position of First Lady, I started working on the hunger issue because I had been aware of our ridiculously high rates of hunger for more than a decade, but pretty quickly realized hunger was a symptom of poverty, and that we really, what I was really interested in was going upstream. How can we begin to really start having more of an approach to not just supporting the Herculean efforts being made by our agencies and NGOs in getting resources to people once they were in the crisis of poverty. How can we actually start getting to the point where we don't need quite as many of those resources, where fewer people were actually winding up in such difficult conditions? And several of the governor's priorities that were rolling at that point made this feel very timely to me. Obviously, the work that you guys are doing with education reform and emphasis on early learning, that was very exciting to me. And evidence suggests that one of the clearest ways to start to break the cycle of generational poverty is to do a really good job with that early learning piece. Similarly, with the healthcare transformation, there's a disproportionate benefit for low-income populations being able to increase access and reduce healthcare costs. And then the part for me that I think sometimes makes most people's eyes roll back, but I was super excited about, was the 10-year state budget plan. Really developing a mechanism where we could start to look at the longer term ramifications of our policy and budget making decisions. And so with those three things moving, I thought it was very timely to begin to develop a framework that connected the dots between how all of those pieces contribute to poverty and whether or not we're going to be able to take a more proactive poverty reduction approach. And that is what led to the development of the Oregon Prosperity Initiative. And I think you've all been given a description, a write-up of this. The initiative, it really reflects the commitment on the governor's part, on my part, and our entire administration to talk about and address poverty. And one of the things that has been really interesting to me working on this the last couple of years is just how excited people all around the country get when they hear that a governor and first lady are willing to use the P word and actually talk about it and address it. And that was the first part of the Prosperity Initiative, was really kind of raising awareness that this is a crisis in Oregon. Currently, we've got about 17 or 18% of us that are officially in poverty, which, if you think about that, is really a lowball number, because the actual level to be considered in poverty for a family of four is $23,550. So with that low bar set, that's 17 or 18% of us. It's really much, much higher, the percentage of people who are having real hardship making ends meet right now. So there's the obvious human tragedy of it, but it's also a tremendous economic drain. And that, I think, really is the unique emphasis of the Prosperity Initiative. Dealing with poverty proactively, strategically, and comprehensively is an economic development issue. So with the initiative, we worked with, I say we, Mr. Withnell has been on my prosperity team from the get-go. I've had a group of about 15 to 20 folks, very diverse, from agency heads to business folks to poverty experts and advocates. We took all of the intended outcomes and recommendations that were put forward in the first draft of the 10-year budget plan, and we put a poverty reduction lens on those and took that work to a new level of granularity in recommendations that we would make in all of the design team areas: healthy people, healthy environment, public safety, jobs and economy. Those recommendations are now actually being reintegrated back into the 10-year budget plan and taking it to 10-year budget 2.0, to use an overused term. That part has been moving along. The other part that we've really focused on with the Prosperity Initiative are prosperity impact projects. And I think, again, the thing that is a little different with this approach, those projects have to have an economic development component. It's not just about getting resources to people, getting low-income services to people. That's fundamentally important. But what's different here is the Prosperity Initiative is really stepping up and highlighting and helping to catalyze and take to scale some really innovative economic development opportunities for low-income populations. And I've got a few listed here. Kiva, I'm so excited about this. For any of you who don't formally know anything about Kiva, it's been around a long time. It's an online platform where for as little as $25 you can make an investment in a low-income micro-entrepreneur. Traditionally, until very recently, they have only supported entrepreneurs in developing countries. We now have Kiva Oregon. So actually John gave me a Kiva gift certificate a number of years ago. I now have a portfolio of 6 or 7 African women, and as of a few months ago, a couple of Oregonians. So very excited about that. Opportunity communities, this is really the work of and the brainchild of an amazing Oregon woman, Donna Beagle, who grew up in abject migrant farm worker poverty and now makes her living working with folks both in communicating about poverty more effectively and also policy development. We have rolled out the opportunity community process in 3 communities, would actually like to raise some money and take this to scale across Oregon. And then the last one that I would mention, really delighted to announce that we received a $500,000 3-year grant from Northwest Area Foundation to support the Prosperity Initiative. One of the things that I really appreciate about this, the Prosperity Initiative is not an entity. I didn't have a corporate structure or a 501c3 to receive a grant to. So we have been partnering with the Oregon Business Council. They are actually the grantee, and are working with us on the Prosperity Initiative, both to develop the communications around it, but more substantively, to roll out an Oregon solutions type process around targeted opportunities in some of our hardest hit counties to actually move people out of poverty and into decent paying jobs. And this first year we're working in Josephine, Jackson, and Malheur County, and that work is just starting. So I'll be happy to take questions about where we're at with the Prosperity Initiative and where we see it going from here. To close, really would like to say that as a person who has experienced the crisis of poverty, wound up on my own at 16, I know exactly what it means to have to choose between paying the rent or paying the electricity bill when they're threatening to turn it off. I've lived in a car. I know some of those difficulties, and I wanted to address you today because I think when I look at the key components that enabled me to become a first-generation college graduate and have a life that I never could have dreamed of, 35 years ago, there were a couple of key pieces. One of them is that my parents, although they were rough, redneck Okies, did a pretty darn good job with us early. They really did. They were engaged. They taught us to read. That early family interaction was there, and it wasn't until I was 8 or 9 that things really started to fall apart. That, for me, makes me realize now, especially having learned about, the recent brain development science and the importance of those first few years. I feel like that was incredibly important to me. And then the other piece was public education. I went to a tiny little rural school in the foothills of Washington High School. It was actually 7th through 12th. My graduating class was 60. I was one, barely, but I was one. And it wasn't a wealthy community, but it was an engaged public school. And I had a couple of teachers and one tough as nails woman principal who recognized when I started to go off the rails, and they had enough resource to actually help bring me back. So public education saved my life. And I just really, the more I've learned about this poverty issue, there is no way that we're going to be able to really bend the curve on poverty in Oregon if we don't really maximize the effectiveness of what you guys are doing in our public education. So happy to be here and happy to take questions.
Questions, comments?
No, I just want to say thank you for coming back. We had Dr. Beagle come really early on in our process, and I felt like it was a great presentation, but then we kind of stopped talking about it, and we stopped trying to deal with the issues that we need to deal with. So I appreciate the great work that you're doing and believe that it is, if we're going to make a difference, to get to 40-40-20 if we don't address this issue. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great.
Yes, Governor, I made a mistake by going to a meeting that I heard the testimony of Sylvia, and I told my wife, I said, she's the real deal, because a lot of in our culture you have the big hat, no cattle, and she carries a lot of cattle.
You're referring to me, of course.
Yeah.
You identified the power.
Right, exactly. But seriously, the Prosperity Initiative really comes into with our education, because as Sylvia said, that you cannot, you have to have a full stomach when you're for education, as you educators know. So, and I also want to take a shout out to Robert Lee too for really helping dotting the I's and crossing the T's on our group. And we've really been getting people that are in that can make a difference, individuals at different circles of Oregon, whether they're a D or an R or an X, Y, Z, to get out of the grandstands and come alongside of this initiative, and that's the challenge that we have. And so the leadership here at this, we need to get involved and get behind this because it affects the education of Oregon.
We're going to take that segue. Sylvie, how do you see the wraparound efforts and the regional achievement collaboratives? How do you see this prosperity initiative aligning to that?
We're actually working internally within the administration to better integrate all of these transformation efforts, and I think it's still really a challenge. But one of the things our team learned working on this is you also have to take a regionally specific approach to poverty reduction. There are some overarching, universal characteristics to poverty across Oregon, but there are also really significant regional differences. And so I think that there's a real opportunity in integrating the poverty reduction and also actually the delivery of low-income services, and I'll come back to that piece, with what we're doing with these early learning hubs and also the CCO model with healthcare. And we're having conversations right now about what that might look like. As part of this whole prosperity initiative work, but I've had very little to do with it, the agency is running it. Housing and Community Services, working with DHS, they're right now also working on really a hard look at what might be a more effective way to get services to people who are in the crisis of poverty. And it's very much looking like that is probably going to move to a more regionally based, ground up approach as well.
Yeah, one thing that, I'm working with DHS and all the entities, healthcare, and I look at the regional achievement collaboratives, one of our big challenges is going to be getting common outcomes. Because we all have a myriad of indicators. I know I'm going to be pushing for the KRA and high school graduation and whatnot. It would be really helpful if this group could pin down a couple indicators that are, like we talked about how third grade reading is the best return on investment in education. Can we have a couple indicators that are the most powerful for reducing poverty? I know it's localized, but you see where I'm going?
I do.
Put that in a regional achievement collaborative?
If you'd be willing, I'd love to just get together with you. I'd love to have you get me a little bit more up to speed on where you're at with this work and how we might integrate.
Mark, I think one of the challenges we're bumping into, it's not surprising, is that with the early learning hubs that are just rolling out, with the CCOs, and I think with the regional achievement collaboratives, you've got sort of jurisdictional and governance questions sort of cropping up, and we're very cognizant of the fact that we need to develop the capacity to ensure we don't recreate at the local level the silos we're trying to break down at the state level. And there really is tremendous capacity out there. And the question is, how do you get it aligned? How do you develop a common set of metrics or outcomes? And I think to some extent those will be regional. So that's one of the issues that we're struggling with. And I think getting the regional achievement collaboratives in that loop would be really critical.
And also how you would link those regional indicators and outcomes with the outcomes related to the 10-year budget plan and all of that. There are a number of layers. So if you're willing, I'd actually love to run a couple things by you.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item is actually an action item, and it involves adopting Achievement Compact rule language, and Whitney's going to walk us through this. This is basically a proposed rule changes to the board's administrative rules on achievement compacts that will bring us into alignment with some statutory changes that were made last session. In particular, House Bill 3075, which moved the annual submission date for our achievement compacts for K through 12 school districts and ESDs from July 1st to October 15th. And the second was in House Bill 3120, which added a requirement that community colleges and universities add achievement compact advisory committees to help them support development of the compact.
Thank you. You just did my spiel, I think. Good afternoon, Governor, members of the board.
So this really is basically a housekeeping matter. As you know, the Oregon Education Investment Board has rulemaking authority over the legislation implementing achievement compacts, and the two changes that were made by the legislature in the 2013 session that the governor just referred to. This is really just a attempt to bring the rules into compliance with those two pieces of legislation that passed. The comments that follow, you'll note a comment submitted by the Oregon Education Association. We have talked together around their concern that was voiced in that letter, and it involved a section of the rules that actually was not part of what is in front of you, and it's a rule that was left intact, and so their comment has been satisfied. There was not any changes made to the K-12 process for Achievement Compact Advisory Committees, and that had been their concern. You know that the board spent a lot of time on that language. That will remain intact, and the changes that you see here are really just to the timeline and adding the Community College Advisory Committee process to the rules.
Questions for Whitney? Motion?
Just one point. On the community college rules, it doesn't mention which chapter of section 202B. Is that just, that could be filled in later? It's not critical. We have that here.
That will, these really are the draft that go then over to be put into the Secretary of State's rule format, and I believe they'll take care of the right chapter references for you.
Fine enough.
Okay.
Second. We moved and seconded, we approve the draft proposed changes to the board's administrative rules. Is there discussion, objection? Hearing none. Thank you. We wanted to move now to a subcommittee update, and I'm going to turn this over to Nancy. But one of the things that I think I've heard from a lot of members is they want an opportunity for a deeper dive into the policy in one time to really think and learn. It's difficult to do that with our schedules coming together in this capacity. We've got really a pretty robust set of skills and intellectual horsepower on this board, and I fear sometimes that we're really underutilizing it. So we're trying. I guess what we're proposing is that we sort of beef up the subcommittee structure to give people that opportunity to really delve deeper into some of these issues and then bring recommendations back to the full board. We've got best practices in student transitions, which is Dr. Mulhill's chairing that. We've got equity and partnerships that Nicole is chairing, and we've got outcomes and investments that Nicole is chairing. So I just wanted to maybe flip this over to Nancy a little bit. I think her intention is to try to move some of the work into these subcommittees as a way to try to be a little bit more deliberative and tee up conversations at the monthly board meetings.
One of the things I heard when I spoke to every board member is move it up on the agenda and let's put less onto the agenda so we have more time to really talk about what happens in the subcommittee, because I think that's where a lot of the new recommendations and the power of really getting things implemented are going to happen. So why don't we just start? Mark, do you want to start and just share? Well, we kind of were hoping the first time what we asked the staff was to kind of talk about your focus, what your focus is going to be, and then your possible timeline. So any additional information, and engage us in conversation.
So you're going to throw me to the wolves, be the first one talking?
That's it.
I get it. We met for the first time today, and I will talk about, Nancy, some of the priorities, but just a little bit as we storm and norm here a little bit, that Yvonne was unable to make it today, so I chaired our first meeting, and Hilda did a fantastic job of staffing it, and I'm excited about our work because I'm seeing the infrastructure that you're putting in place, Nancy, to support the committee. And we discussed that, our transition today, that last year this committee did a lot of hands-on work, in particular with the achievement compacts. And we talked about our role shifting now to one being at a 15,000-foot level, that we're not directly working on those things, rather we're reviewing that and monitoring transitions. So as OEID discussed at our retreat about our job really being one overseeing a seamless system of P20 and getting those transitions, we see this best practice as being very similar in a more centralized middle level type of work with it. So you can see our foci that we discussed today. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The two areas that we had presentations from today that were very, very well done was first the ELL report from David Batista from Assistant Superintendent of ODE, and obviously Rob has made that a priority. Rob, congratulations on getting that staffed. He came with his staff today. You've got a lot of talent there, a lot of horsepower. I think it's your first win in that area. And that came through very clearly today. David presented a very nice status update on the 6 goal areas of the ELL plan that, you remember, we adopted an ELL strategic plan. We adopted the equity lens. They merged that in with the department. Talked to Hilda today that we might even want a standing agenda item on the progress of the ELL effort. Second thing we talked about that goes along with the educator effectiveness network that we discussed last couple of years, that being the teacher preparation, the Secretary of State audit. It was really well done. I don't think there were too many ahas on support levels and how we need to improve support for our teachers. And we talked about mentoring programs, we talked about the college preparation perception and some recommendations. So just those were 2 themes that I would anticipate we would continue working with. And finally, we also emphasized the need to look at the investments being made in the P20 structure along the lines of best practices. So for instance, passing 3232, a lot of those RFPs are rolling out, the strategic investments. How is it going with those, and monitoring the return that we're getting on investment for the specific programs, such as mentoring was the first RFP that came out. So I'm excited about the group. I think, I love to see how it's transitioning and we're evolving and growing. I think with Hilda and Yvonne and the crew that we have on there that we're well poised.
Thanks. Any questions or remarks? Cool.
Great. We also had our meeting today, and we spent our time looking at our year-long plan and thinking about sort of what we want to accomplish this year. And it fell into several categories. We have an ambitious plate for this next year. We feel like there's more work to be done on the equity lens and promoting that, making sure it really truly gets incorporated. There's some folks that may not even be aware of the equity lens yet and the opportunity to implement it. And then we also had talked about how with the equity lens, while there was very good effort to make it a document that belonged to the entire P through 20 continuum, we still want to focus a little bit more on supporting early learning and community colleges and higher education and their role in that equity lens. And then the 2 areas that really came out as our highest priority, where we feel a very strong sense of urgency to make some concrete policy recommendations, are around the continuum of opportunity for out-of-school youth. So first and foremost, we want to identify the root causes that are pushing young people out of school, recognizing that we have a significant problem in middle school, and then really looking at where we can collaborate with others who are already doing work in that area to have a full set of recommendations. We're in a fortunate position in that several groups are working on different aspects, and so we would like to set a goal of having a policy recommendation in April to be vetted by this board. And then the other area that is a very high priority is actually around special education, specifically the overrepresentation of children of color being over-identified as being on an IEP, but we also recognize that there's just a whole host of issues around special education that impacts vulnerable young people. And we feel a real sense of urgency around creating some policy recommendations in that area. when we did the equity policy, we intentionally said we want to focus on race, because we found in all of our examples that when folks were clear about what their focus was, they made better progress, but I think that there was a lot of passion from many of us on the committee that special education really needed to be addressed. And so we don't have a timeline associated with that, but that is very critical. We also heard a really excellent report getting us up to speed about where we're at with the Minority Teacher Act. It was in draft form, so we made a series of recommendations, and we're interested if there's an opportunity and time allows for our committee to help support any advancement in the diversification of our teacher workforce. And I would just say we're interested in the diversification of the workforce of all of our institutions from early childhood all the way through higher education and community colleges. But so that's just largely a planning of our work for the next year.
Thank you. Questions for Nicole?
I have a comment, Governor. I just want to talk about, I met with the Portland Parent Union. I spent a Saturday with them, and they were talking about how 5-year-olds are being identified, are in school the very first week and are being, the parents are being told that their children don't fit in. And I want to say, as when I was superintendent, we learned from Tiger Tualatin, where Rob was, how to use response to intervention, and we reduced our identification to special education by over 20%. So, I know what it's like when teachers don't know how to be able to meet the needs of all of their students, and we've got to be putting those systems in place. And I know, as Whitney reminded me, as we look at the response to intervention data, what we find is in those districts who use it, we're seeing increase in student achievement, and at the same time we're seeing tremendous reduction in the amount of students who are receiving special education. So I think that is the job of the Oregon Education Investment Board, is to find those best practices and put them into place, because 5-year-olds should be celebrating that they're in a place to engage in learning, create a caring culture in a classroom, and not need to go other places. But that's up to us to create the systems, because teachers definitely want to meet the needs of all of the students. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Rob. Your district was really the leader.
Thank you, Nancy. I just always thought the beauty of RTI really was in not identifying students as having any kind of disability. And really it was about, a lot of times we would get students who would arrive who had deficit sort of experiences and learning opportunities, and being able to differentiate in a really strong way the difference between a learning disability and a deficit. And then, what you're able to find out with RTI is that if you really intensify instruction and use the right methodology, students who arrive underprepared to be successful gain skill really rapidly. And then once they do that, that there's, they're absent of learning disability. And if they don't, if you try several different efforts and they don't make those kind of learning gains, then perhaps they do have some kind of learning disability. I know in my own district, we were under the 11% cap, I think all but 1 year. And when I say 11% cap, districts in the state receive special education funding double the weight for up to 11% of their students, and then after that there's sort of a different methodology to see what kind of funding you're going to get. Very, very few districts are in the state are under the 11% cap. There's a real disproportionate identification of students of color, in particular students of poverty, as special education students. That identification is really profound, really a profound identification. It means something about the kind of education that student is going to receive moving forward. And it really is a life-changing moment to some degree when that identification is made, and it has to be made really correctly. And so the thing that RTI allows us to do is, I think, make that identification more appropriately. There is a distribution of students who have learning disabilities across the state that's relatively equal. And so I could never understand how one district might have 19% of their students identified and another have 10.5% of their students identified. In Tiger Tualatin, we were generally around 10.5 to 10.7% of our students identified, and I think that's appropriate. The nice thing is that the state has supported a roll-up model, and when Nancy says that Tiger Tualatin supported Springfield, it's because the Department of Education basically gave us a grant to do that work. And the investment board encouraged, and we were able to get out of the last legislative session, double the funding for that scale-up effort. So we had about $1 million a year to scale that up across the state, the RTI methodology. We now have $2 million a year to scale that effort up. And really, at this point in time, there's a level of readiness that's required on the part of school districts in order to be able to grab a hold of this and begin to learn about how to do that and roll it out well. And we're right up against that. With the $2 million, we're sort of right up against the number of districts that have demonstrated the readiness to move forward with this model. So I feel like we really hit the sweet spot on the funding and our ability to scale this up. And we'll be really close to 100 districts in the state having been trained in RTI by the end of this biennium.
And the
Probably
best-
more than you wanted, but there you go.
The best thing about the model is that it's teachers from your district coming, talking to teachers, like in Springfield. And when I would talk about it, I didn't get the response when teachers talk to teachers, because they ask real specific questions about how do you do it in the classroom, and teachers can answer that. So I just think these are the kind of models we need as we scale up across the state, so.
And just to close out the conversation, I think we as a equity committee, we recognize that everything we do is cross-cutting with every other committee. And I think where we're challenged, and I'll share the challenge or the burden with you, is that so many of these issues are so deeply interconnected. So as we heard, disability or IEP needs are equally distributed across district and across race and ethnicity. So it's very striking when there's such deep disparities, but what we know is that communities of color are underrepresented in early childhood and formal preschool settings and Head Start. They then don't get identified, so that small interventions don't take place. They're then immediately identified for an IEP in a very, very young age. We then don't have a teaching workforce that culturally reflects the students, so that adds additional burdens. And then you start to see, as a result of that, additional discipline issues push out and drop out. And so it's very tricky if you're the equity committee thinking about where you can best make an impact, which is how we have sort of landed on these 3 priorities around special education, the policy recommendations around dropout and push out, because we recognize we need to do something about the near 30% of students who are not graduating today. And yet we also need to diversify our workforce. But it's very difficult when you look at that circle and how all of those things impact each other to sort of choose where to intervene. So I'm just sharing our challenge with you, and if folks have perspective or advice for us, we're very open to that.
I don't know if this is advice, but we discussed in ours, Nicole, on the need that the subcommittees, the overlap between the subcommittees. We've talked about a Venn diagram or a visual. That was my question. But basically, we're going to be talking about investments and trying to make change, and we need to at least have some understanding of what's going on when you guys meet, because we're talking about a lot of times the same issues, the same kids.
I think going along that line of the investment, it is RTI, you're talking about a smaller group that's working together, different interventions, research-based materials that you're using with students. And it's an investment that you make, and that's where, are we willing to make that investment to make sure that every student has access? In some districts, as they've implemented RTI, I believe certain schools had money and certain schools didn't have money, and they were all expected to implement the same programs. Well, you can't have smaller groups if you don't have more adults, and so there's just a lot of work around. If we truly want to do it, then how do we make sure that we invest our money where we believe we'll get the best outcomes?
Thank you. Mr. Withnell?
Yes. Well, we met for the first time this morning. Hannah was one of the members, and Ron Saxon got the professional educator and the professional businessman, and then the used car salesman. So we're
How'd that work?
yeah, that worked real well. Actually, it really did. I think first of all, the name Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee changed from that growth and results, really said it all. because the handshake between investments and outcomes, or between outcomes and investments, is really the name of the game. And Mark, your comment about the cross-pollination is really important. It's really our group. We're looking for, I guess, one more person to be on our subcommittee, but to have Hannah's professional input is. Well, both Hannah and Ron are very, very quiet and not aggressive in their thoughts. But seriously though, it's going to be a good group, and we hopefully that with the support that we have from Dave Edwards, the statistician, and what's great about him is he's been both in the public and the private sector and vice versa. So we had quite a bit of discussion about the quarterly scoreboard, and it was pointed out that we're sometimes just arriving at numbers just to write a number, but we really need to know the push between outcomes and the investments of those outcomes. I personally am a 95-5 type of person. I spend 5% on where we've been and 95% of where we're going to go, and we're not looking for a whipping boy, or we're not blamed or anything like that. We just want to move the dial up and meaning better outcomes for our individuals. I don't want to even use the word business plan, because we're not talking about widgets here for outcomes. We're talking about individual lives, and that's I think that all of us here on this dais, we feel that what we're talking about here, and so I think as we go along, I don't know how we go about this, Nancy, but Governor, but some way or other of maybe the chairs of the subcommittees anyway could meet together or something to see that cross-pollination.
It's a great idea.
I mean, it's almost cliches to say, but when you add in the poverty issues, and when you add in the resources that we have, and what helps educate our people in our state, we're all together in this thing. So we're not isolated. So however that can be done, but that's about it. Questions for you? Whitney, do you have any comments at all? Dave, you guys? Or Anna? Yes.
I'll just say how excited I am that the research that we're going to do to actually ask how it's going and get some feedback so that we can improve along the way the compacts and the processes that we're using. I think that is so respectful of us really wanting to get somewhere better for our students. So I appreciate Nancy, the hire, and Whitney and David were both extremely helpful in our conversation.
So next, we're going to have a discussion of this draft brochure. We got some money from Nike, right?
Nike Innovation Fund.
Ann Lipsitz is here with us, and welcome.
And we also have Kristen Dunball, who are going to share with us. I'm just going to begin. I think we have some, are you going to hand the information out, or do you want, is Seth doing that, or?
Yes, and we're going to wait until we can give a little bit of context. So.
Okay. So I want to begin by saying, I think you all know communication is a goal. Again, one of the things when I first started talking to people, it's confusing about exactly what does OEIB do. So we wanted to have a pamphlet that would really articulate why is OEIB so important to our students in Oregon. So Anne was lent to us, I guess, through the Nike Innovation Fund, and she's just been phenomenal to work with, because we'll give her language and she'll say, oh, I talked to 5 friends of mine and they're all very involved in education, they couldn't understand the words you were saying. You've got to make it understandable. So we've gone through this zigzag process to really be able to produce document that we really speak to the partners, so that as board members or as key staff, when you go out and talk about OEIB, you can hand this out in a way that becomes very compelling. So we're just thrilled to share it with you. This is just a time to get feedback from the board. So even though this looks like a classy document, it is just a draft, because they're going to listen to you and then take it back. And we're actually going to use a process with you so we do get feedback. So I'll turn it over to Anne and Kristen.
Hello, Governor. Hello, Board. I'm Ann Lipsitz. This isn't my usual thing to talk into a microphone, so excuse me if I'm a little unused to it. I'm really privileged to be able to work with you all to further the work that you're doing. As a former teacher and principal, and then after 20 years in the private sector doing brand marketing and strategy, it's really gratifying to be back working on education and being able to lend some of my time to the efforts that you're making on behalf of our kids. So thank you.
Excuse me, I don't think all of us have that. Or are we supposed to not have?
We were going to set up what we've tried to do and then hand it out to you.
Oh,
if that's
okay.
okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Tim gets a little.
I get a page. Here, We actually did rocks and scissors and I lost, and then these two guys didn't have guts to ask. It's a teaching technique for off-task behavior. Yes, thank you very much.
We're not keeping anything from you, I promise.
Nice
So
pictures too.
through the School Innovation Fund, I did meet Nancy and I'm pleased to offer my time here. What we've been working on with Nancy and her team is trying to be crystal clear on the work that you all have ahead of you. And it's interesting to hear the subcommittees report out that some of the things we've been talking about and trying to figure out how can you tell the public what's happening in a more accelerated way. I think this is something very new for the state. It's extremely exciting. Most people don't understand it. So as Nancy said, I did use sort of my neighborhood and my PTAs and my different circles to test some sentences. And the vast majority of people, even if they're very involved in their own child's education, very involved in schools, they don't know the language. They don't understand OEIB. So I tried to take combine my backgrounds and listen to Nancy and Kristen and Whitney and try to put together something that could be in your back pockets, be in the staff's pockets to share with partners and potential partners, and eventually, high school kid, what is OEIB? How are we on your side? What's going to be different? I think one of the big challenges is putting ourselves into the eyes and ears of parents and teachers and college kids to say what's coming and how do I help. It's going to take a lot of people to make education better in this state and get to 40-40-20. So I think that's the effort. This is the first of many things that we'll try to create. So it's not the one thing we'll ever work on, but we want to get something out there. And Kristen will take you through step by step what it is. Mm-hmm. Good? Okay.
I just want to thank you, Anne, for all of your energy and hard work on this.
It's been fun.
Governor Kitzhaber, members of the board, Kristen Gimbel, Communications Director for OEIB, and I promise we're going to get to this brochure you've all been hearing all about, but I just want to share a bit of top-level context as to how we arrived at the design, the content, and then ultimately what some of the next steps are. As Anne said, from a design perspective, the strategy here was really to educate our inner circle of stakeholders, policymakers, senior educators, individuals that we're already working with on the initiatives of OEIB, ultimately to align so that we're all talking about the work using the same language and framework before we begin to start to extend those ripples out into the larger education community. So the piece is really designed to create awareness, clarity, to build some energy, convey momentum for the work, and ultimately to get people excited and ask the question, how can I help? From a content perspective, we really worked to ensure that language was accessible to a broad array of audiences. Given that this work can be really complex and cumbersome, this piece is really designed to bring it into the average everyday Oregonian in a way that they can understand and get excited. The purpose here today in getting your feedback is really to use this piece and the content that we approve collectively in this piece and get excited about to then disseminate out to other pieces, be it the website, be it targeted pieces to other stakeholders, teachers, community partners, parents, students. I certainly don't think we'll be coming before the board before every piece, but this one feels really foundational, and so we want to make sure that we can get your good thinking around how to best frame some of these high leverage opportunities. And I'm going to ask Seth to hand out the brochures if you would. And while Seth's doing that, I just want to share some broad themes that you'll see throughout the brochure. First of all of the images in the brochure are purely placeholders. Until we really finalize the content, the images are meant to really just give you a sense of where we can include imagery. Ultimately, the images will not only include the spectrum of ages represented along the continuum, but also certainly the diversity of the students we serve in this state. The content has really been thoughtfully updated from some of the pieces we've been using to make sure that we're talking consistently about what the P through 20 continuum is. So really starting with birth and going through graduate school and the world of work. We've been really intentional about incorporating the equity lens as we think about the content. So making sure that instead of saying, for example, all students, we're saying each or every student, really personalizing. And then finally, one of the things that we're focused on is making sure that while this brochure is designed to be very bold and eye-catching and exciting and engaging, we don't lose key content and messages via some of the colored boxes or some of the significant content. We want to make sure that the vibrant nature of the brochure doesn't take away from conveying the message. And with that, I know everybody's excitedly flipping through, but I'm just going to walk through page by page and then ultimately ask for your feedback in a couple of key areas. So as you walk through the brochure, obviously in the inside cover conveys the vision of the Oregon Education Investment Board as approved by this group. The box on the bottom talks about what success looks like, and this is one of those boxes I'm referencing where we've got to make sure that this is readable. This is a fun color and purely draft look at this. On the right panel, a message from the governor and his excitement and vision for this work and the opportunity it holds for the state. As you open the right panel, you'll see these 3 action-orientated words that we used to try to articulate the work of OEIB as it might be seen from an everyday Oregonian. We've used these words, which are purely in draft form, as well as these symbols to convey action, to convey engagement. And if you open up the piece to the inside so that it's completely unfolded, you'll see a timeline. And the timeline is really meant to tell the story of the pathway and the OEIB's core priorities at critical junctions along the way. It's really meant to show progress across the continuum and importantly to characterize key benchmarks that we're all going to be watching very closely for each of these critical junctures along the way. And finally, if you flip to the back panel, you'll see it is a piece that's been designed to be a self-mailer. This was a very intentional strategy for a couple of reasons. One, it creates a more versatile piece so that if this is handed out in community events, it's really easy just to extend a hand. If it's mailed, by virtue of the front and the back going through the mail, it creates another touch point for individuals to learn a little bit more about the work of OEIB en route to its intended recipient. You'll see on the bottom left corner is a prospective logo that Anne and her team have been playing with for the OEIB. And then ultimately, the copy that's articulated in red is really meant to call out, why is OEIB important? Why does success in this effort matter? And I'm going to stop there, and I would like all of your feedback on this piece. And I think in a couple of ways, the feedback would be most helpful. One, what feels like it's working well? And working well to me falls in a couple of buckets. One, from design. What catches you? What feels compelling, exciting, engaging? And then from a content perspective, where do you feel like the language really grabs you, or you feel like we got it? And then the second piece of feedback is, this is a piece that's been designed, as I understand it, at the request of many of you, saying, I want to take this out to my community and to stakeholders and be able to share the work of OEIB. And so it's important to us to know whether we've captured the questions and the critical clarity that's important to you and to those you represent in your own communities. And so I'd like to open it up for feedback. And one of the things I'll say is, for purpose of discussion, if we can concentrate on some of the high-level issues, and then if anyone has a specific piece of feedback on languaging or grammar or anything like that, feel free just to jot it on your brochure and hand it to either me or anyone else on the OEIB team, and we'll be happy to incorporate that into the general feedback. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing feedback.
Yes, please.
Governor and colleagues, I know some of us have had conversations and we're glad to see this. So let's just start there. It's been very clear to me and a lot of us that we need to communicate more, better, deeper, faster, and with more impact about the work we're doing. So just let me say, thank you. I'm sure my colleagues will have some other comments. I particularly want this in Spanish and Vietnamese and at least 5 or 6 other languages. And want to use some other ways to target in addition to the printed word. My wife reminded me this weekend that my daughter texts and no longer even answers the phone. So Mark and I were talking about how with kids of about the same age, we're in a whole technological place that's different from the place we were comfortable with a decade ago. And so we're gonna need this to go to a higher level than perhaps some of us technologically are. I'll just leave it at that. But this is, I like what I'm seeing. I'll have other comments for you, but I just want to laud this in terms of a piece there, because I think our various publics have been looking for some ways for us to message what's going on, and I'm very, very sincere in hoping that as we refine this, it's going to be a piece that's going to be something that I'm not going to spread it on the whole cul-de-sac, but there'll be some opportunities in the interaction.
I want to just echo the deep appreciation. I think there's a lot of really wonderful things about it. Just a few sort of big picture pieces. I think that the chart, and maybe this is a placeholder, I think that the chart actually reflects data about overall Oregon. So like the 10%, that might be true for everyone who lives in Oregon, because a lot of people who graduated from high school and college have moved here from somewhere else. And if this is a piece that is going to go to folks who are engaged in education, they're going to take one look at that chart and get suspicious immediately, because it's one cut of the data, if you will. I also think that this does not reflect our equity lens, and it doesn't speak at all to racial disparities. And I mention that not just because I'm the chair of the equity committee, but we are going to come to a time and a place where we are going to be making critical decisions and choices that will be made based on where the greatest opportunity lies, and we'll be making that because 37% of our kids in the state are students of color. Not everyone experiences our state that way, and so you need to help us make that case and have folks in every part of the state understand our demographics and where we're struggling the most, and this doesn't do that. The other piece is that a lot of folks that we would be wise to bring along and help get excited about our work are going to be older people. And white font on color and tiny print is very difficult for older. It's very difficult for me.
I'm experiencing that right now.
And that's like Kristen said, that's definitely something we've got to address.
And I'm not a graphic designer, but I'm just thinking about strategically the groups and
Yeah,
people we want to make our case to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Echo, it's great. I just want to sit here and read it for a while, which tells you something. I think a lot of people will want to pull it out and just read it. I think the colors, the kids, I love the opening. I would like to spend some time on it and give it back, send you some comments. Just as a first blush, I would echo again, I feel like there's too many words. I'm probably typical of a lot of people that read the first paragraph of the newspaper, tell me if I'm going to stay with it or not. I'm finding myself losing attention. So I think that you're keeping the 3 bullets, that's nicely across the spectrum, but I believe there's too much verbiage in it to keep people's attention. Second thing that I picked up, I love visuals and the pie graphs. It's difficult to do these things for audiences, but if our audience is the public in general, and the feedback you guys, people still don't know who we are, simplifying it more. And we are about investments. We are about P20. We are about advisory. And anything we can do to simplify the message. If you talk to the guy on the street, they're worried about class sizes. They have no idea that the state of Oregon just invested over $1 billion in K-12 funding. They still don't know that. And they're concerned about safety. So whether or not this document is to meet all the needs of communication, I know, I get it. But the guy on the street, I believe, is going to start skimming it, liking it, but he's going to be looking for some things on funding, class size, safety, and whether we incorporate all of that, I don't know, but I do think the simplification of the messaging on what people on the street want, there's some disconnect.
I would just echo 2 things. One, I do think we have to recognize that there are multiple audiences. I'm certainly not trying to tell Nike how to market our message. But I think Nicole points out that, to really make this work, you got to move out disproportionately with certain groups of Oregonians. And it's really important that they understand what we're trying to do. Secondly, on the, I agree on the sort of just too wordy, and I'm sure there's a way to, the headlines in newspapers, which apparently don't have anything to do with the following stories. They're done by 2 different people. But you do read the headline, and I think that if the top lines can somehow draw you in, maybe there's a second piece or something else that you could go to get more details. Which I think you got to somehow capture their attention from it. Yeah. I don't know how you do that. But.
I would add to that. I wouldn't start with graphs because most people don't really focus on graphs. They really want to focus on the message. And I just had a conference last week where I was with a group of millennials who said, "You can't say it in 4 words, don't bother."
That was 140 characters.
Because they're texting all the time. I know there will be different audiences for this, and I think if we can capture what we really are about in either that bold first page or second page, that would be the reason people will continue to read. But you are going to lose some people if it's this wordy. People aren't going to read that. Attention spans are too short today. And I echo Nicole's concern about making sure we do have an equity lens so that people will want to read this and read it.
I think you need to pick up a couple IPO literatures because the initial public offering literatures get right to the point and they're very concise because they're asking for a great deal of money and they need it right. And so it's just an idea.
Thank you all so much for the feedback on the wordiness. It's something that we were certainly concerned about, and ultimately we're hoping that you all could help us prioritize which of the content was most critical, and I certainly think you've done that, so thank you very much.
And I assume that people want to take this home, and they've got 2 in now.
Yeah, thank you.
And then how's the best way to get back to, just get it back to, directly to you, to Nancy?
You can send any
Okay.
feedback directly to me,
Okay.
and you all have my email address via the org chart and attachment that Nancy handed out.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, while we still have Mr. Cannon with us, maybe you could give us an update on the hacker.
Well, yes, Governor, thank you. I want to reassure you and and the board, or perhaps warn you and the board, that I'm not going far, and that I intend to expect to continue to sit at this dais as an advisor to the OEIB as established in legislation, and really to help amplify the voices here speaking to post-secondary, including our interim chancellors, our OSAC executive director, Tom Rude, Gerald Hamilton, our community college commissioner, and then of course our various higher education leaders who are on the board. So I really do appreciate the opportunity that the governor and Nancy have provided me to step into the role as executive director of the commission. I'll spend just a couple of minutes talking about some of the priorities for the commission, and begin really just with a reminder around structure. I don't want to spend a long time on this, but since the board dug considerably into the topic of our state structure for education, and really helped bring about this new, the new structure that is coming into being. But just to remind you, what the legislature did, partially at your urging this legislative session, was to establish that Oregon would provide oversight and support to our student access and financial aid programs, our community colleges, and our public universities, as well as regulate our private higher education institutes through a single board commission, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Historically, those are roles that have been played by multiple state boards, and that those institutions would come to be, particularly on the public university side, governed more closely to home. And so this was a kind of corresponding measure with the local boards or institutional boards that were created at 3 large universities. So that's the new sort of structure that's come into being in this. The governor appointed the new Higher Education Coordinating Commission. It was confirmed by the Senate in September. David Reeves is your OEIB crossover member, if you will, who's also one of the 9 members of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and that new commission will meet for the first time later this week. So in terms of priorities, it really, I think, will of course be defined by the commission, but they will come out of the strategic plan that this board has identified, and really be linked to the kinds of priorities that this board has set for the P20 system, but to take them in a deeper level and to sharpen them around higher education. So I'll mention a few that are, I think, very much on the table and ripe for the commission to take up. And I'll begin with the category that you all have defined as strong policies for P20. And here, clearly, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission will be working with your leadership to focus in on the question of that 11 to 14 transition, the transitions between high school and post-secondary. Likewise, the commission has a critical role to play to ensure continued and enhanced coordination within higher education and among higher education institutions. So look at all the progress that's been made under the leadership of the interim chancellor and former chancellor, under the leadership of the commissioner and former commissioner for community colleges around transfer policies, reverse transfer now, a variety of tools that students have and opportunities students have to navigate the higher education system more seamlessly. And the HEC will be attempting to really accelerate that type of approach. In the category of budgeting to outcomes, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission has a responsibility to develop the consolidated budget request that will be presented ultimately to the governor for his consideration in the presentation of the governor's recommended budget. So the Higher Education Coordinating Commission taking its goals, the OEIB's goals, the legislature's goals for higher education, and developing a line and consolidated post-secondary budget to bring that forward. Likewise, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission becomes responsible then, once the appropriation is made by the legislature, to decide how to allocate it within the community college system, within the public university system, to students via Oregon Opportunity Grants or other need-based aid programs. And the Higher Education Coordinating Commission is likely to be considering, as the Board of Education has before it for community colleges and the Board of Higher Ed for universities, how to do that in a more outcomes-focused way than it has done, than either has done historically. And then in the kind of connection to student achievement initiatives, There's work that you've tasked it to do related to the Oregon Opportunity Grant and how to fashion that more sharply towards student success and student outcomes. A lot around the topic of student access and affordability. You may have noted the kind of national, even international news that the pay forward proposal received coming out of this legislature. The HEC will be responsible for evaluating that, as well as other potential funding opportunities to improve student access and affordability for higher education, since we know that to be one of the major barriers that sits between us and success in 40-40-20. And then finally, coming out of your priority for an engaged and informed public, there's a lot that the HEC could do here. It clearly will be encouraging and supporting institutions and their communities to participate in the efforts that you're leading through Nancy and her staff in regional achievement collaboratives. The HEC has a clear role in advising you on achievement compacts. So when you're considering the next round of higher education compacts, I expect the HEC will have some advice about the measures that are on that compact and may help in the refinement of that. The HEC will be presented with the equity lens that you've adopted and asked to consider adopting it itself. The HEC will, at Nancy's invitation, will be presenting liaisons to your subcommittees. So like the Early Council and the State Board of Education, you can expect that your 3 subcommittees will also have a member of the HEC, and David will serve in that capacity on one of them. So it gives you a sense of what's on the plate. It is, from all accounts, and certainly for me, a very exciting moment in the history of higher education in Oregon. These changes are both perilous in some respects. There are certainly pitfalls that the HEC will be doing its best to avoid. They're also opportunity rich, and the possibility that Oregon would have really a higher education system unrivaled in its levels of coordination, in its links to K-12, in its support for student success, and access and opportunity. I think it's right there, and I'm very, very excited to get started.
Thanks, Ben. Is there any questions for? Okay, thank you. Well, let's take a 10-minute break here, and we'll.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is an agency update, and I'm just going to hand that over to Nancy to talk about how we're going to handle this item on the agenda going forward.
First, I want to welcome you at your first official time as alternate chair. I know you gave us much advance notice that you got to miss 2 meetings when you were on the phone, so Mark did a great job, and it's great to have you here. So as you know, the board really enjoys hearing from agencies, and last time we were going to do a few, but then when people were left out, everyone asked everyone to report. So we've moved to the system of saying everybody should report, but do it when you've got something that you really do think is important to talk to the board about. So Bob had something he wanted to share with us, and then Vicki might be waiting one time.
I actually came prepared, Nancy.
Okay, good.
So I led you to believe otherwise.
Okay, so we'll start with Bob, and then that's great. Vicki's going to share some things from her agency too.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Bob Brew. I'm from the Oregon Student Access Commission. And I brought with me our annual report, which was just released here within the last month. I'm not going to go into it too much detail. I'm going to go at a high level, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer it. But just a few highlights. One of our primary programs, our biennial budget is $136 million, and of that, about $112 million is the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So it's obviously the bulk of our work. But if you turn to page 4, I think you'd find this interesting. This shows the applicants, the number of applicants we've received for the Opportunity Grant for the last 15 years or so. We're actually this year, this shows through 11-12. This year we're projecting we're going to be down about 6 to 7%, and we anticipate this will, in terms of applicants, and we anticipate this will continue going forward. This past year, we awarded something on the order of $52 million in opportunity grants. For the current year, we anticipate about $55 million in opportunity grants. For those that are curious, about 31.04% of our awardees are students of color, which compares favorably to our comparator data, which we use from the 2010 census, which is about 18.1% of the Oregon population. It's good news and it's bad news in that it's good news that we're reaching so many students of color. It's bad news that this is a need-based grant, and so it indicates we have a high percentage of folks in poverty, but at least we're providing this, I think, important tool. Another large program for us, if you could turn to page 11, is our private awards program. We work intensely with our partners at the Ford Family Foundation and the Oregon Community Foundation and a lot of individual donors to run their scholarship programs for them. And we provide a whole market basket of services for them. This chart on the upper right of page 11 may be a little confusing because we're trying to present 3 pieces of data in one chart. But basically what this is telling you is in school year 12-13, we awarded $16.1 million in private money to Oregon students, about 3,200 awardees, and 423 individual programs. And this year we're well on our way to getting to 500 programs, and we anticipate record numbers. An interesting thing about our scholarship program, we actually have students getting awards in every county in the state. That's not by design, it just works out that way. So we have a broad array of applicants from all over the state. And I think that my latest numbers are 24.1% of our awardees are students of color, which I think is admirable in that we're not allowed by state law to award any of our 450 programs specifically designed to award a specific race or ethnicity. And for instance, some of the tribes have scholarship programs. We're not allowed to administer those because they're specifically for members of that tribe. But even given that, we're pretty successful in our awarding. Yes, sir.
Bob, have you broken that down by gender at all?
By gender?
And the boy-girl breakdowns?
I do have that information, I just don't have it with me. It's heavily weighted towards women, just because they make up the bulk of our applicants. They spend more time on the application, their essays and so on, and they get the bulk of the money.
Yeah, you know, we talked a lot about equity and this boy-girl completion, and we've got our issues with our boys and access, and so I would just encourage that we monitor that as well.
And I'm sorry?
No, I figured, you're gonna ask questions afterwards, or well, on page 4 there, I can't let this go by, where we're not allowing the incarcerated to apply for eligibility grants for particularly the Oregon Youth Authority people who are incarcerated. There's 26, I think, or 28 men that I'm involved with, I'm involved with who are getting 2 years and 4 years degrees up at McLaren, and they happen to be under Major 11, which gives some angst to some people, but there is a huge return on investment by education on the incarcerated, and if you want to really slow down recidivism, education is a real key. So I know it gives some people heartburn. I'm a pretty conservative guy, but I'll go head to head with anybody who says that someone at Oregon Youth Authority should not be getting grants to go into higher education. It's nuts, because these kids will not go back. And oh, by the way, we're spending $262 a day on them being in. So that's just a point I wanted to bring out.
Doesn't that come about because of state law?
I honestly, sir, I don't know well, I mean, it is in state law, I don't know the history of the state law.
Without going into the weeds here, if you're OYA, you're under treatment, you do qualify for Pell Grant and other grants, but unfortunately, if you're a Measure 11, you're under custody, and so the fact that you're still located at the OYA place, you're really in incarceration, and incarceration, you cannot get a Pell Grant. So, I mean, it's just a little bit of a problem. But,
Chair, I would underscore what my colleague is saying. I had an opportunity to supervise a community college and university program in a prison in another state. I live somewhere else, confess. And over a 10-year period where the state was experiencing between 30 and 50% of recidivism, the program in which we had over 500 graduates was about 1% in terms of recidivism, having entered a program like that and being subsidized. What I think that points out, and yes, that was a different galaxy far, far away, but my colleague's point here is that there is room to consider some investment in programs that provide education for persons and support for education for persons that are incarcerated, if we expect those persons to come out from incarceration and be vibrant participants in this society.
So perhaps we could ask Nancy and her staff to identify some of the policy around this that impacts the behavior
Frank Chambers would be the
schools.
Frank
So
Chambers.
we could just do a little exploration
Yeah,
about
yeah.
what we might want to do.
That sounds good, Chair.
Yes, thank you. So we're going to be starting a fairly deep dive in the Higher Education Coordinating Commission on the Opportunity Grant, kicking off on Thursday. And this is one issue that I'll bring to their attention. Another one that I'd like to bring to their attention is, you'll remember last legislative session, the legislature passed a tuition parity bill for undocumented residents. Currently, undocumented students are not eligible for the Opportunity Grant, so we might look at that as well. So thank you. Our scholarship application is our online application for students to apply to these 450 plus programs. That underwent a major redesign last year, and it's getting retooled for this year. It's currently in testing, and we'll be going live out to all students on November 1st. We've had incredible positive support through the testing program, not only from our partner schools across the state, but from the Oregon Community Foundation, the Ford Family Foundation, and volunteers. So that's personally very exciting to me.
When you say going live, that means all high school kids will have access to this via internet?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
November 1, the site comes up. It will remain open for students to apply for these awards up through March 1.
Thank
you. And then our last flagship program is the Aspire program. Page 14 talks a little bit about that. I believe the Aspire folks have been here to present before, but they're our high school mentor program. They're also active in middle schools and community colleges, community-based organizations, and very active. This past legislative session, through the governor's leadership and the legislature's support, that program was moved primarily from being grant funded to having general fund support. So we're able to create a much more stable organization, currently serving 135 schools, and we hope to grow that over the course of the biennium. And that's the extent of my presentation. Are there any questions?
So I'm really fascinated by the chart on page 11. Why this sort of struck my fancy, but first of all, I'm really pleased to see that students in every county are availing themselves the opportunity. But I'm really struck by Harney County in particular, 49 students, which is a county with a very low student population. There's not very many students in Harney County, compared to lots of other counties around. Or I could look up at Union maybe. There's a couple different ones that sort of stand out for me as not very many students, lots of awardees. And then I go out to Washington County, lots of students, 193 awardees, and I'm just wondering, what I really am looking at is, what percent of all students are awarded per county, and why the discrepancy exists. Is it because that there's a poverty discrepancy, or is it because some places do a better job of advertising to students and getting them to apply, or exactly what the status is, because those are really striking differences. Just curious.
Yeah, so I can't answer your first question, but I'll be glad to get the percentages of students that apply. But I can address a little bit the second question. I think it's two things. Number one, in the schools where we have Aspire site coordinators, they're much more likely to complete because it all comes down to hand-holding. And in many of our rural schools, this is a graduation requirement. You fill out the FAFSA, you complete your OSAC scholarship application, or you don't graduate. And so in some of these rural counties, there's virtually 100% participation.
Thank you very much. And I think it sort of speaks to the investment in Aspire, and also the investment when we make sure that we have kinds of college-going initiatives where we do hold kids' hands as they make that transition. Thank you.
I just, maybe hold hands gets some people going in one way. I think when we provide the kind of relationship that helps kids see their investment, there's a different take on that. I think that works with a lot of people. And I think where we have that opportunity for a mentored experience in terms of going on to post-secondary, I think we have a pretty good trail of evidence that it can lead to some real success.
I apologize for the poor choice of words.
That's, gave me a chance to say that.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, Rob, when you asked that question, that's exactly where I went, because I've been to some of the schools and seen their Aspire programs, and just to be in that area where the counselors are talking with the students and hear some of that. You see that in one school and then you don't see it in another, and that has a huge impact on whether students move forward. So I'd be interested, not that I want you to go to a whole lot of work, but knowing where those sites are that have Aspire, to be able to share out with districts and say, well, here's the impact that it has, because if we're talking about best practice, this is something that may be one of those we want to really emphasize.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions for Bob? Okay, well, Ben.
I think Bob noted it, but as we look at this map, this refers to the recipients, I believe, of the private scholarships that are administered by the Oregon Student Access Commission, not the General Oregon Opportunity Grant. And as a result, some of these private scholarships are regionally specific. They were set up by a donor to fund a particular county, even, I think, in some cases, or a particular school. So some of the abnormalities, I'm sure, do have to do with the access to something like Aspire. Some also have to do with a philanthropist in a particular community who has said, here to OSAC, here's some dollars through the Oregon Community Foundation to spend to improve college access, and that's reflected in this.
Vicki.
Nice report, Bob. I feel like a puncher. So, I have prepared a report, but some of the conversation today made me think about some of this comes to life if you have some numbers. And the commission, in terms of collecting data for the 2012-2013 school year, because we haven't received the employment data for this school year, we had 60,049 licensed active educators last school year. And of that group, 50% of them were unemployed. just to kind of give you an idea, and this is just tracking employment in the public schools. But more interestingly, pre-1999, of our 60,000, 26,000 of those folks were licensed prior to 1999, and only 18% of them were unemployed. So 82% of them who were licensed more than 14 years ago are working. The post-1999 teachers that we prepared are 29,834, which is just 3,000 more than the pre-99. 46% of them are unemployed, and I don't know why that is. So our old, what we would call our old basic standard prepared teachers are highly employed, and our newest prepared teachers are not. And then out of our 60,000, in terms, this is self-reported on our applications, 3,228 have identified themselves as belonging to a community of color or some community of ethnicity, which is only 5.4% of our entire group of licensed educators, as compared to nearly 20% of student population, I think you know now, in the public schools. Here's the statistic that concerns me the most. Of our mere 3,228 identified teachers of color, 49% of them are unemployed. So we are not even capitalizing on keeping the ones that we have prepared and out there and ready for the workforce. So as we talk about our initiatives, we have some intrinsic things to do in addition to recruiting and increasing those numbers. But I had it already, Mark, and this won't shock anybody. 72% of all these folks are women, and 28% are men. So I thought you might be interested in how our licensed staff breaks down.
Could you send that information to OAB?
Happily, I will do that. I have divided my report up into 3 very easy pieces. Licensure, accreditation, and talk a little bit about 2 budget notes we received. And we are redesigning licensure. We've been working on this for over a year and a half. And I just want to give you some highlights. This aligns with one of your objectives on page 25 of your strategic plan, by the way. But what we're trying to do is get all teachers on one license, so we don't have any confusion about who can teach what and how they're licensed. So we're going to move all the basic and standards and all the people who've been prepared to date onto a new license.
Just a minute, I gotta make sure I'm sitting down. You're
Yes, we are.
one license.
One license. One license group. But hang on.
So you won't have basic.
You won't have basic, standard, initial, and then a new license because we're redesigning license. And the licensure redesign had already started, so we were able to work really closely with Chalkboard and the legislators on House Bill 3254, which asked us to redesign licensure. So what we will be looking at is a beginning teacher license, which will have a very short time span to advance to professional teacher license. That would be your in-goal license. And then we've created an advanced professional license category for people who are nationally board certified, want to be teacher leaders, who might have a speech language pathology ASHA certificate, any number of ways that they can demonstrate excelling. And what I'm most excited about in that category is it has to be sustained. In other words, you cannot remain an advanced professional unless you sustain your energy in terms of contributing to the profession or remaining a teacher leader or that sort of category. The other thing the new licenses will eliminate grade levels as they relate to buildings. So we will have a K-12 license, which is confounding people, but a lot of states do this. We'll leave it up to districts to determine the appropriate expertise and placement of those folks. And we won't get hung up on whether it's a 7-12 high school or a 6-8 middle school or things that this agency that I've worked for the last decade has concerned itself with for about 4 decades. Unnecessary categorization that just creates heartburn and it defies logic. Why can this person teach 3rd grade but not 4th grade, or teach 5th grade but not 6th grade? I'm very excited about that. And we're taking highly qualified into account. And we're also taking the new proficiency movement into account. If you think about eliminating grade levels, this is perfect design for proficiency. You can use high school math experts anywhere you want down the continuum in terms of placement, assistance, coaching, whatever you would like to do, as an example. And we have already taken the step to streamline our content endorsements so they'll be tight and tidy and there won't be a multitude of them. And therefore, every math teacher will teach the same thing. Every elementary teacher will have the same scope of authority. And so that just gives you an idea. We have to have this legislation prepared for the 2015 session to give you an idea. We're also moving on, working with ESDs to provide professional development certification for people who aren't working. They have to have professional development. We don't have the manpower, and the education service districts have stepped up. We have 5 pilot districts. It's working outstandingly, and this actually aligns with your goal in terms of redesigning ESDs and their efforts on page 18 in your strategic plan. If you move on to accreditation, we worked on remodeling our accreditation standards and aligning them with national standards. We worked over 2 years on this, and we've been implementing it for just a little over a year. And one of the things that we've been able to do with accreditation is that the commission identified one of our preparing programs as being at risk of low performing. And it actually led to a stipulated legal agreement to what they would do in order to come back up to speed, and they were given 1 year to do that. It compelled them to completely revamp their program, and we just did a follow-up accreditation visit, and it was a successful effort. So we're excited that our standards actually can be measured and are making a difference in that area. And so that aligns up with page 17 in your strategic plan. But I do want to point out that in our new accreditation standards, we have the strongest equity, diversity, cultural competency requirement for education preparation programs that apply to faculty and apply to candidates. So regardless of where candidates are placed, universities are responsible for providing multicultural experiences for their candidates throughout their programs so that they can be prepared to work in a diverse school setting regardless where they go. Also in accreditation, we are working on developing these standards. We've spent over 2 years working with a stakeholder group of teachers. Yvonne had worked with us closely, university staff and others, to develop ESOL competencies for non-ESOL specialists. So instead of saying a certain percentage, and actually a very, very high percentage, over 30% of our teachers have ESOL endorsements. Aside from that, everybody else, administrators, everybody else, have to have more competency in working with second language students in all of the strategies. Then following on that and related to that somewhat is we're working on creating dual language immersion teacher preparation requirements. In other words, if you are teaching in a dual language immersion program, what are the skills that you should have to be successful in that environment? So that's a fairly new initiative. We've had several conversations. And then we've been looking with Hilda with a coalition of stakeholders in the education arena at the new teacher education accountability standards. And this is related to, if you watched MSNBC this morning, President Obama talked about associating federal funding to high performance across secondary education. I think teacher education has really been has long had rubrics for measuring their success, but we would drivers to be looking at this, and what we come up with are the new federal reauthorization for the Higher Ed Act, the federal reauthorization for the ESEA, and for acronyms, Elementary Secondary Education Act, and also linked to changes in national teacher preparation accreditation. I think you've noticed in a lot of the reports, they want a lot more state website transparency. They want the state to show how folks are doing. So we have a group working on what those indicators might look like. And finally, are in the process of starting to adopt standards for teacher performance assessments prior to graduation and becoming a teacher. What would that look like? If we were going to use tools to measure teacher performance, then we need to have standards to adopt those. Just marginally related to that, we have initiated a conversation with ESDs to potentially provide pedagogy training for our career and technical education teachers who come in from the professions. And I'm excited about that prospect. And then finally, we were directed to bring back a business plan. We had already done all the work for a new IT system, and this would have the agents be completely automated, including online applications and everything. Our last estimate of that effort was $700,000, and if you look at a biennial budget of about $4.5 million, you can see what a heavy price tag that is for that effort. So accordingly, we were also directed to raise our fees. It will be shocking. So just as I look at my one licensed teacher to my right, but and Mark, it will have to be. Teachers right now pay either $20 a year or $33 a year for their license, whereas a barber pays $200 a year. You know, an esthetician pays over $200 a year. It's out of perspective, and we were directed to compare to other professions and other licensure boards and get ourselves in line, which would then allow us actually to complete the work we need to complete appropriately. That's my report.
Thanks, Vicki. Questions, Sam?
But the last piece, so how much is it gonna cost?
I don't know yet. Well, our fee, I have to report.
Because when I go back to the university, I got students that want to know if it's going to cost them $350 after they just paid for.
Well, say yes, and then if it isn't, they'll be pleased.
Madam Chair,
I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know, because what we have to do is I have to do the trajectory for the new licensure, and 67% of our people are on 3-year licenses right now. And we're going to move the majority of the workforce onto 5-year licenses. When you amateurize that out, you have to maintain your cash flow to run the business, and so we have to determine how that's going to work.
I had only 2 questions before that, but the first one goes back to taking a look at the endorsements in particular. How has the shift that you conceptualized, and I'm particularly interested in science, how is that going to affect the ability to have qualified science teachers? My big concern is for girls and women, but for science teachers in general. I mean, we've had problems all along recruiting and maintaining science teachers. So will the new standards, will the new approach help us with this issue?
We've probably already taken steps to help us with this issue, and a lot of people aren't aware of it. But 3 years ago, we went through every single science endorsement, looked at their actual preparation to obtain that endorsement, what their knowledge base had to be, and then expanded the scope of courses they could teach. So there is not a college science graduate who can't teach the first term of chemistry, or lower level biology, or lots of the general science, and we expanded into the agriculture. This has all been, we worked with the Department of Education, and so this is all on our website. Our districts should have no assignment issues for any science license for the last 3 years. And nothing would change as we're proposing. This is fundamentally about the underlying licensure structure. We're not looking at changing the content areas of knowledge. Those are pretty set for us. Right now, we are, our endorsements represent the alignment with all the national standards for K-12 education in those areas, and so we're pretty happy with them.
Okay. For part, I mean, not happy, but okay. The other piece is, the feedback I've had is that we've changed the alternative routes for certification, and that it's had an impact on Latinos who had alternative patterns to certification and no longer have those. Am I
The commission,
misapprehending?
it's yes and no. We have no evidence. We did a longitudinal study of the diversity and ethnicity and makeup of people who accessed alternative assessment to obtain licensure. And we couldn't find a trend, and we couldn't find a pattern, and we couldn't find a disparate impact on communities of color. Here's the issue. The commission was allowing people to waive those licensure tests of content knowledge, and those are one major indicator of depth of content knowledge. And the commission was doing 0.1% of waivers a year, of everybody who was being licensed. So you can't find any other profession that waives the requirement to pass at least the minimum bar, which is knowledge of the content test. So the commission eliminated it 2 years ago, and nobody's lost their license. It's we adopted tests with a testing company that has study guides, practice tests, lots of opportunities to learn how, and tutorials. So I haven't heard anything for the last 8 months.
Okay, I had heard some feedback, and particularly around people who had dual language competency and used alternative means by presenting a portfolio, not necessarily passing the test.
No, let's talk. It wasn't a portfolio, but we can talk.
Okay.
Other questions for Vicki?
Just add on that, in our subcommittee, we talked about having TSPC involved in that. And, Vicki, this work lines, as you stated, right where we're going with that educator effectiveness, so that might be a heads up.
Thanks, Vicki, and thanks, Paul, for these great reports. So we're now going to move on to our own learning, and we're going to have some training on public records. And I think Connor, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm told that brevity is the soul of wit, and though I can't promise that presentation on public records is going to be all that witty, I do promise that it will be brief. My name is Connor Edmonds. I work with the Secretary of State. I work in the Archives Records Management Unit. For some of you who may not be aware, the Archives is not just a place where we house the historical records. We also have the other side of the shop, which is my unit that I manage. It's the Records Management Unit. Very creative naming there. Where we go out and we write up record retention schedules for state agencies, county government, city government, all 240 some odd incorporated cities, boards and commissions such as yourselves. And basically that's your legal authorization to destroy public records that you create. It should be mentioned at the outset that there are actually two sides of the public records law. One side has to do with access, and I'm not here to answer any questions about the access side. As an archivist, we're more, although that tends to be the more interesting side of the public records law. I'm here to talk about the retention side of the law, but just to give you an idea, folks who are in state government or in boards and commissions, if there is an access question that comes your way, such as we create these board meeting minutes or executive session meeting minutes, we're receiving a public records request or, heaven forbid, litigation request against these records. Can we or do we present them? Those types of questions will go to typically for people in our positions, such as the state agencies and boards and commissions, to the Attorney General. That is the office that determines whether or not those records are disclosable for public viewing. And in addition to that, so you can do some of your own research up front, there's a whole entire list, an ever-growing list it would appear, of records that are conditionally exempt from disclosure. All having to do with, saying, for example, you might not have known that the actual location for an archaeological dig or a cultural site is not a disclosable public record, albeit it is a record for retention purposes, which is the side of the law that the Secretary of State addresses. It is not a disclosable public record, and I would encourage you to take a look in Oregon Revised Statute 192 for other records that are conditionally exempt from disclosure. So moving on to the retention side. Records retention, basically what is record retention? Now, as I mentioned at the outset, that my side of the shop there at the archives, we go out and we draft up record retention schedules. It should be mentioned that less than 2% of the body of any records that a governmental entity creates is actually a record that has permanent or ongoing research value, and then will at some point end its life cycle at a record repository such as the state archives. So what is it that we do with the remaining 97 to 98% of the records? This is where my folks at my shop come in and we write up these retention schedules, and these retention schedules give state agencies, boards, and commissions both the minimum and maximum length of time that the public record should be kept to satisfy the administrative, legal, fiscal, and historical values. So that means if you have a record that is, for example, budget development records, in the case of what Bob had been putting out today and working on, those would be retained for X amount of years after the final budget had been developed. You certainly would not want to destroy those records before that period of time as listed in the board's and commission's general record retention schedule, also the state agency general record retention schedule, which can be found in the Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 166, 350, and 300 respectively. But he wouldn't want to retain that for much longer, and because if you retain that for much longer when you don't need to, then we go back to the access side of the law, and when that litigation comes up or that public records request comes up, then folks like Seth, for example, would have to find those records and potentially disclose them. So you don't want to have to search against records that have already met their retention. So how is it that we decide what a public record is? Now, we had recently updated in the 2011 legislative session what a public record definition is for a record for retention and disposition purposes. And this is kind of a rundown of what that definition is. More succinctly, this is the definition. In the past, we had basically kind of a rundown, a litany of all the things or formats that a public record can manifest itself in, such as the notes on, say, for example, a napkin, or handwritten notes, or machine-readable punch card records that used to be those records that we would do our time cards on back in the days of yore. But now what we want to do is, what we endeavor to do is to make this definition less format dependent and more timeless because of the need to make this timeless because of changing technology. So this is a three-part test that we basically, if you can inquire of the record, is this a record that is either prepared, owned, used, or retained by a state agency or political subdivision? Now we can answer any yes to that for practically everything. It should be mentioned that you have to say yes to all three of these before you have a record for retention and disposition purposes. So you move on to the next item. Although you would say, like, for example, spam information from, like, for example, trade magazines, these listserv. These are things that you probably would not, though you can answer yes to this, you'd probably not want to retain them other than for referential material. So the B part is, does this relate to an activity, transaction, or function of the state agency or political subdivision? In many instances, we can answer yes to this as well, but not all instances. So we have records that, for example, are duplicate records. Seth passed out many duplicates of the reports that were presented here today. Those duplicates, though it did relate to activity and transaction or function, it doesn't necessarily mean that it falls under the public records retention definition. Because, as you move to C, is that particular record necessary to satisfy the fiscal, that is there an outstanding audit against that record, so the record needs to be around to support that audit. The legal, are there any outstanding statutes, either state or Code of Federal Regulations, that already place retention periods on your records? Those are things that we research and include into your Oregon Administrative Rule for your retention. Any administrative need that's outstanding, we need to have this record around for as long as it takes for us to fulfill our particular duty. This does not necessarily mean in many cases where a person's administrative need can be pretty subjective. Well, I need to have this around until I retire. That's not necessarily an administrative need that we consider when placing values to records. Or any outstanding historical or research value to a record. So if you have, or you are able to answer all three to this particular definition in the affirmative, then what you have is a public record for retention and disposition. It should be mentioned that if you are able to answer no in one of these instances, yet you still have the record around, it could be a public record for access. So the takeaway from this is, if I don't need to retain it, and I am legally authorized to destroy it, then I should destroy it so I don't have to make it accessible to public records requests. Now that sometimes seems as if there's a little bit of, we're being opaque, especially in a cultural milieu which is increasingly asking for transparency. The point here is that the administrative costs and having to fulfill public records requests is rising, especially when we talk about most of our records that are being created electronically. And though electronic storage for records is inexpensive, migration of those records forward from platform to platform over the period of the life cycle of the record becomes more expensive. So if you're not having to retain as much and you are able to legally authorize to destroy it, go ahead, and I encourage you to do so. Some public records examples are, and this is, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can see, some of this is kind of like, yeah, no duh, Connor. Boards and commission meeting records. But where we get a little bit fuzzy, what public records are not. You might not have known that duplicates are records that you can destroy. If Seth, as the administrator of the board commission here, is retaining all these records, the record copy of those records, then what he has is the official retention copy of the records that you have all before you. You are legally authorized, unless you need to retain this for your own purposes, you can destroy the duplicate. I wouldn't do it in front of Seth, that would kind of make him feel bad, but you are legally authorized to destroy that. Listserv messages, advertisements, junk mail, spam, general mailing, the charitable fund drive is coming up. We get a lot of information about that, and we've had, he'll go and name a director in the past at the Secretary of State who had 2 gigabytes of records that were just full of listserv, please approve at this timesheet, on and on and on. And so we had to deal with that after the fact. That's kind of the cross that archivists have to bear in many instances, just have to deal with classifying records after the individual is gone. Reference materials such as articles, magazines, and books, they're reference material. There's no legal mandate that you have to retain those. On that list of, in ORS 192, there's also a little blurb about how voicemail is not a public record for retention and disposition. Although I know that some counties have discovered that it could be, if it's still around, there for access. Here's the gray area. Drafts. Now, this is interesting, especially for a governing body or an advisory group such as yourselves. Drafts could actually be a public record because the drafts, with each new iteration of a draft, it could chronicle how you arrive at a particular decision. For people like myself, drafts are basically limited to, in terms of retention, a substantive change to either content or format. So those are, I don't have to retain, every time where my boss says that you misspelled this or that, or there's some grammatical errors. Project team records, who's responsible? This is a good thing to keep in mind, especially as we are basically a team here on this board and commission, where if you designate, which I believe has already been designated, the person who retains the official record copy, then we can do what we need to do with the other copies of records that we have. If that particular determination has not been made, then it needs to be made in terms of who is the official record copy holder. Notifications, that's a gray area simply because if you are the person who's tasked with carrying out a particular function on that notification, you need to do it and retain that record. Message strings, this is particular in reference to email messages. You can have, the question comes up often, we have this long discussion thread of back and forth. Do we have to retain every email portion of that message? And from our perspective at the archives, you only have to retain the last thread in that email, unless there are some other attachments that go along with that. You want to make sure that you capture the attachments as well. And I don't know if you've been using social media, but if you ever do decide to go into that social media avenue, you're going to want to have policies and procedures in place. You want to make sure that if you do have Facebook posts or Twitter feed posts that you designate, an official Facebook poster or an official tweeter, so that you are able to put the best foot forward in terms of a public presentation of what it is that you do here as a board and commission. So we are also available to give advice and assistance, not only on public records matters with respect to retention and disposition, because by no means am I expecting you to all remember that, but you can contact us at the State Archives for any questions that you may have related to policies and procedures for public records and retention rules, and for that matter, any questions about the preservation of digital records for the future.
Thank you, Connor. Any questions? Well, thank you, and especially thank you for the brevity. You promised that, and you did it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, before we move to our final agenda item, public comment, Nancy, you have something?
I have one last staff person to introduce, and that's Seth over here. So you want to raise your hand. I thought as we wrap up, the person who makes all of these meetings run smoothly. We all know Seth Allen. Maybe what you don't know is 2 weeks ago, he had a second child. So.
Nancy, may I interrupt you
Yes.
just for a moment? Seth, could you step up here? I just happen to have a little deal here for you. Rob Saxon will really appreciate this. Tiny but mighty. I don't know, probably the wrong size, but it will be all right.
Thank you very much.
Hey, you're awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Is that left over from one of your fundraisers?
We just want to see if Seth gets any sleep over the next one.
Well, and his wife, was taking quite a little while to have the baby, and the whole time Seth was just making sure he was taking care of her and his other child and us at the same time. So another thing you might not know about Seth is he's a pretty accomplished actor. So it's really fun to sometimes find out about what people do as their avocation. So thank you so much for the service you give to this board. It's really
Thank you.
Work on notifications and make sure that we do all the things we're supposed to do to have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, are we going to do the order now or after?
After. Okay. So, we have 3 people signed up for public testimony, all of them from Oregon Save Our Schools. And just a reminder that each speaker will have 2 minutes, and Seth will be our timekeeper. And first is Tom Wilson.
My name is Tom Olson. I'm one of the co-founders of Oregon Save Our Schools. And Dr. Mulvihill mentioned that you are likely moving to the 15,000 foot level this year. I'm going to ask you to descend with us for a bit to a ground level concern. And that concern is our Save Our Schools' very deep concern about teachers' increasingly turbulent professional working conditions. And this concern is especially apparent in our state's focus and priority schools. As you know, those are the 15% of the schools in the state that have the lowest test scores in reading and mathematics. And they had to apply the label, either focus or priority, in the No Child Left Behind waiver request. Early in 2013, the State Department of Education appointed school appraisal teams to conduct in-depth 3 to 5 day site visits to each of these schools, about 85 schools in the state. The appraisal team was to prepare a report based on their findings, including required interventions to improve the school's performance. The appraisal process cost the state well over $1 million. We have reviewed these appraisal reports. The required interventions were obviously written from a prearranged and prescribed script. We question whether the reports were even written by the appraisal team members. Absolutely nothing in the required interventions relates to any unique challenge in a particular school. Absolutely nothing is suggested to better engage families and community to remove poverty's barriers to learning. We think that's particularly appropriate given your earlier discussion about the Prosperity Initiative. Strangely, even though there were different appraisal teams for different schools, exactly the same text for the required interventions, always appearing, strangely, on page 25 of every school report, that same text is used in report after report. And here's the single most frequently prescribed intervention. Quote, active engagement and planning associated with implementation of the Common Core standards. So as schools opened last month, we found teachers spending precious time pawing through various useless toolkits, surveys, checklists, needs assessments about the new standards. They are admonished to accept without evidence that these new untried standards are the most important solution to their school's performance. Oh, and the teachers are also now learning how test scores will wrongly be used to evaluate their performance. We ask you to launch an independent investigation into the specific impacts of the state's blind acceptance of federally imposed No Child Left Behind waiver conditions on our teachers' professional lives.
Thank you, and I've been advised it's actually 3 minutes, so we've got a little more to do that. So next is Steve Buell.
Yes, my name's Steve Buell, and I'm a 40-year school teacher. I'm one of the founders of Oregon Save Our Schools, and a member of the Portland School Board, of which I'm not talking for them today, but for myself. And one of the things that Tom pointed out was on your, we did in Portland Public Schools have 11 schools that you sent out appraisal teams to. And those particular appraisal teams under your waiver are supposed to write the reports. But they didn't. I talked to the person who put that together. You spent $800,000, which is not a small amount of money. We could use some of that in our district. And yet you didn't even stick to the waiver, which said the people who do the reports and go out to the schools are the same people who do the reports. They didn't do the reports. It was done someplace else. I hope Mr. Sachs can figure out why that took place. I mean, we didn't even stick to the waiver, but that's not what I'm speaking on, just adding on to Tom's things. I got a recent email from a teacher in Portland who in the first month, she's a teacher in the first couple grades in Portland, the first month she had these things to do. In the first month, they had a new Synergy total computer system. They had a new email system. They had a new evaluation system. They had new testing for the MAPS test. They had new standards, Common Core. They had a new proficiency grading system. All those things come basically out of the state to some degree, with the possible exception of the new email system. in the MAPS test, which they might not have to give, but the state is pushing data on these people. And what's happening is we in Oregon are destabilizing the classrooms for our children. And so you come out of a very unstable home possibly. Maybe it's a loving home and so forth, but it's maybe very unstable. And a lot of these kids who come out of these homes are in our poor schools, the ones we're trying to work with, 85 or so priority and focus schools. And we, instead of saying we're bolstering up, instead of working on having wraparound services to help these children, we're destabilizing their school. So here's this teacher in the first month who's doing all this stuff. Oh wait, doesn't she have something else? Oh yes, she has some children in that classroom. And maybe she should be spending the time the first month getting to know those kids, setting up the programs, the procedures, all the things that make for an excellent teacher. Not in our school. We have all these other things that we're doing. We've destabilized them. I don't see how that fits the idea of helping children in poverty. And I don't see how that fits the idea of our equity policy. So our poorest kids, we go in as a state and as a district, in my district, we do this in my district too. I'm fighting this in my own district. We go in and we destabilize their school. You know, I had a good friend by the name of Herb Cawthorn, I'll finish this sentence up, this is the last sentence. I had a good friend by the name of Herb Cawthorn who wrote the desegregation plan with me in the city of Portland in 1981, and he always said, if you got a broken appliance, you can kick it once really good and sometimes it'll start, but if you shake it all the time, which is what we're doing, it'll break. And we're breaking this system because we're not taking these things into account. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And next is
Yes.
Rex Higgins.
I'm Rex Higgins. Just like to say that my populist roots tell me that every good garden party needs a skunk. So you're blessed with 3 of them today. And I think it's time you listen to some. I'll give you the elevator version. I did make a copy of my remarks, but I don't think I had enough for everybody. So here's what I have to say, what I'd like to call to your attention. Obviously, any reform is not going to succeed without a critical mass of highly motivated teachers. I don't think anybody would doubt that. I hope not. Secondly, have you read the research on motivation lately? It tells us that control over one's work life is the most important factor in motivation, particularly for professionals. Okay. The turbulence in our schools is causing more and more, Tom identifies, causing more and more teachers to feel they're losing control of their work life, of both what to teach and how to teach it. They talk openly about a lack of respect for their profession and their professionalism. Then there's some research on teacher satisfaction, which in my mind is one of the great spin incidences of the last year, if not 10 years. So according to MetLife's annual survey, or semi-annual, biannual, what is it, Sam? It's every 2 years?
I think it's every 2 years.
Yeah. Teacher satisfaction is at a 30-year low, having dropped, 20% in the last 2 years. Now, that's according to MetLife. Then we have another survey done by Pew. And Pew survey says, their headline, talk about headlines, Mark, I think. Their headline says, teachers are happy people. They're the most satisfied people in the country. Except that when you get in, so that's the headline, and when that came out, people couldn't wait to jump on it. I think it took Stand for Children 21 seconds to put that on their Facebook page. Took me 22 to fire back with what I had to say here too, but that's another question. So here's what Gallup, deep in the Gallup poll, way where nobody reads, is this. The only obstacle in our way, this is Gallup speaking, however, may be the workplace and schools themselves. Despite enjoying top marks in overall well-being, teachers rank toward the bottom, that is 8th out of 14, of the profession surveyed on one very important element of well-being, work environment. They rank 6th in saying their teachers, saying supervisor treats me more like a partner than a boss. They are dead last, 14th, behind coal miners and truck drivers, in saying their supervisor always creates an environment that is trusting and open. They're also dead last in saying, excuse me.
Rex, could you wrap up?
Yes, I'm about done.
Thanks.
And saying they were treated with respect all day yesterday. Gallup says we have to fix this. We agree. I think my ask would be that you cast a really critical eye on everything you're doing and everything you're supervising here, and try to ascertain what is causing this. Ask a teacher, and by the way, don't ask one of the teachers that have been groomed and rewarded for participating in this process. Just ask a plain old teacher. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for submitting that testimony. So, anything else for the good report of the board?
At the last meeting, I had asked Rob for some information on standardized tests and what we're spending on it. And he sent me the information, and I think to the points that were just made about the stress and what's going on in our schools right now, not only the amount of money that we're spending on standardized tests, I think we need to look at that very closely. We're spending of our own state money, it's about $9.6 million of item, and then federal, about $11 million of money on standardized tests that are getting in the way of educators really feeling like they're able to teach the students that they work with every day. The standardized tests are biased to our students. As we look at our equity lens, as we look at trying to make sure that we're serving every student, we need to look at that. We need to make sure that as we look at how we use the time, the limited time that we have with our students wisely, I think educators across the state are crying out for some help from a group like us to say, stop the madness. Let's talk about how we actually can use assessments that guide our instruction and get away from some of the emphasis on standardized tests. We've got Smarter Balance coming in. There are formative assessments that come with that. Are we going to pay the money for that, or are we going to actually trust educators in the state to create the assessments that will guide their instruction and allow them to meet the needs of their students? And the only other thing that I'll add is I was at a meeting last night with my colleagues from Canby, and they were talking about how the start of the year has gone. And it's not uncommon because I've been in many local meetings recently. The stress level is so high, and the anxiety around Synergy, which was mentioned. This is a new student tracking system. I don't think people understand the impact that it has on educators being able to do their job. But also, and we've mentioned it over and over again, but we've got classrooms in Canby, 34 students in primary grade levels, and it's not acceptable. And if we do not address that, then our students, we can never expect 40, 40, 20. So I hope that we can look at some of the areas that we could address through some best practice, that we can share forward ideas about how we can invest in public education and do the right thing for our kids, but those things are getting in the way right now of successful starts to the year.